This week's episode of the Eldritch Lorecast, James Hake finds his way to Melbourne in person. This is not a trick. I'm really here.
And today we talk all about exploration in 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons and the One D&D playtest.
All that and more right now. I'm going to come over here and give me a hand with this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just while this loads up, it doesn't look like...
What?
I'm just waiting for
What?
this.
That's
But
crazy.
How could this be?
Oh, we are.
I don't understand.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of the Eldritch Lorecast, the #1 podcast across at least 2 continents, although a little bit more weighted now towards the Australian continent. My name is Ben Byrne, and I'm here with Dael Kingsmill, Shawn Merwin, and in person, for the first time, James Hake. So we are extremely excited. I'm just making sure you're in frame as I quickly click through my things here. But anyway, this week's podcast, slightly in person, about 10% in person.
Ben, I'll just sort of crouch behind you like this for the rest of the show, if that's okay.
Great, yeah, no, that
The
won't be
rest of the perfect. Yes.
I see no problems.
That's how we should have done it.
The whole time.
This week, I heard that one of us was having a bit of a, not an issue, but just a question for Twitter. Dael Kingsmill wondering how to get an adventure started, a D&D campaign. And I wanted to know what was some of the feedback.
I just want the people out there to know that I tweeted, wow, I feel like I've forgotten how to start a D&D campaign. And like an hour later, we got the run sheet for today's episode. And Ben was like, what's the opening question? How to start a D&D campaign. I feel attacked.
You shouldn't feel attacked. You should feel invited to share your experience with the class.
Supported.
Yeah, exactly.
I think the tricky thing, my current problem is that so I've basically just not been running D&D as much, or have been only running one-shots and things during the COVID years, TM. And I'm trying to get back into actually starting some campaigns. And I've got my idea of what I want to run, and I keep sitting down to work on it. And then I realize that I can't get much further than I am without knowing who the characters are going to be. And so that means that I actually have to ask people whether they want to play and figure out a session 0. And that is I feel real clunky in that area right now. But at least I got some commiserations from like Zach from I Speak Giant and various people who were like, yeah, that's hard.
Yeah, it is. I feel like the most recent D&D campaign I started was one of the worst starts to a D&D campaign I ever did, because it was like, all right, I'm making Grand Theft Grabenstein in terms of like open world, go anywhere, do anything you want. Sort of like I've created all these quests and all these different things. And the parties start in the tavern in the center of town where they're meeting. You can go anywhere, you can do anything. And the party are like, all right, what are we meant to do? Like what, when nothing seems urgent, when it's kind of like, you drive the story. I think it's a very attractive thing to do, or it's like advice that's given a lot of like, just make an open sandbox where the party can go anywhere and do anything. But I think in practice, sometimes it can kind of result in, just people feeling, or the players feeling a little bit lost in terms of which direction they're meant to go, or what seems the most urgent to their characters. James, what's your experience? Now that I can look at you directly, what's your experience starting D&D campaigns? How do you like to start?
Look me in the eye and ask me that question, Ben Byrne. When this sort of thing happens, my instinct is that it happens because the players themselves don't have enough attachment to the campaign world. And generally that happens because, it's not a real world that they've lived in. It's a world that the DM has created and maybe has exposited a bit of information about, but they need those touch points to know what's even possible for them to do. And on top of that, even if they do have a good grasp of the world and the setting and the people around them, their characters in that moment need to be highly motivated as well. If you're playing a group of adventurers whose main motivation is like go explore a dungeon and find some stuff, then you won't have players who are really receptive to, oh yeah, I'll go anywhere and do anything, because they have one thing that they want to do but they don't really know how.
I'd like to start by first, as Dael said, figure out what I want to run. But one step further than that is figure out how the players are going to interact with what I want to run. Are there any special themes? Any special play styles that I'm looking to bring into the narrative? And then after I get all that done, I say, okay, what players do I know that would really, one, love this, and two, be good with what we're trying to do? Then reach out to them, give them the rundown of what I'm thinking. If they're on board with it, then ask them, what would you change about that? And once I've done that, then it's getting into all right, let's put some threads in that everyone can follow. If their character is motivated by this one thing, I need this one thread that character can follow, give them a reason to do so. The last campaign where I sat down and ran a full campaign was the Acquisitions Incorporated adventure. So I made sure I told my players, this is going to be different than what you've done in the past. Are you ready to get into some business stuff and some non-adventuring goodness? And not only did they embrace it, they enthusiastically embraced it, to the point where there was almost a whole separate campaign of things they did business-wise outside of the story that was running through the adventure. And it was wonderful, because they were so enthusiastic about both sides of the experience that once they get bored with one side, they can switch over and they can start experiencing the other side of the normal D&D campaign versus this weird business stuff. And it worked out very well. I haven't run a full campaign in a long time, so I may be in Dael's shoes in a short while. I hope you don't wear heels, because that would kill me.
I'll find my most comfortable shoes for you.
I appreciate that.
Follow-up question, just off what Shawn said. What do you consider to be a full campaign? Like, what is it? 6 sessions? Is it 2 years? What's a full campaign?
Well, right now I'm just using it to mean that I want to do like a complete arc over multiple like extended sessions, right? So right now I'm thinking like 6 to 8 to 10 sessions for this one, just a short one, because again, I'm in love with the idea of short campaigns right now. But just we're following through this story. It'll have a beginning, it'll have an end, and it won't be a one shot.
Yeah, that's fair. All right, we are going to try just changing this up, because apparently it's a little bit rustic for
technology.
Welcome, good morning. Welcome to this morning's episode of the Eldritch Lorecast. My name is Ben Byrne, here with Dael Kingsmill,
Ben
Shawn
and Jimmy in the morning.
and James Hake. Yes, how are you
Cheers.
going? How are you going?
Is it weird recording this in the morning for you?
Mm-hmm.
You're used to doing this at night.
Yeah, is it weird recording in the morning?
Oh my gosh. Weird? No. Different? Yes.
Okay, fair. That I did worry slightly that we were going to be set up in time, so that James didn't forget that the recording wasn't in the afternoon. It was, in fact, in the morning. All right. Thank you, chat. Let us move on to a little bit of Eldritch Lorecast news. This feels even more casual than it did a moment ago now that I'm sitting back. I hope that I can still be heard clearly. All right. Eldritch Lorecast news. We have news. It's not a new YouTube channel again, although hilariously, you and Shawn didn't know we were creating our own channel when I announced that, did you?
Not at all.
Your look of genuine surprise, if you go back and watch episode 46, 45, I think it is, with Matt Colville guesting.
Yeah, I wasn't even there. I just came back and we were on a new channel.
Yeah, sorry about that. That was a bit of a crash
tells
decision.
me anything around here.
Luckily, this next bit of news isn't a surprise to you, I hope. PAX Australia which is a convention that's not currently happening because that would be PAX East?
PAX West.
PAX West. PAX Australia is happening in Melbourne in October, from October 9th to the 12th, I think, off the top of my head.
I think it's 7th to 9th.
7th to 9th, whatever the Friday to Saturday is around that weekend. We will be there. Dael, myself, and James will be hanging around at PAX. Ghostfire Gaming has a booth, so we will be, at least I'm speaking for myself, I'll be there in the afternoon of the Friday and the morning of the Sunday at the Ghostfire Gaming booth if you want to rock on by and say hi. And we will also be doing a live panel called Authoring Adventures with myself, Dael, James, and Phil Beckwith, sort of filling in for Shawn for that panel in a spiritual...
Shawn is there in spirit, like a Beyblade.
Exactly. We'll keep just turning to Shawn and being like, Shawn, what do you think about this specific topic?
And then Phil will fire us.
Yeah. And then shortly after that, so that panel is at 12:30 to 1:30 on the Sunday of PAX. So come check out Authoring Adventures. And then we are also Sailing the Stars, an ethereal sea adventure at 3:30 on the Sunday. So same day, you can go from one panel, then go get lunch, and then come to the other one, which is an actual play with myself GMing, with James playing, with Dael playing, and also we have Luna from the Luboffin YouTube channel and Matthew Perkins from the Matthew Perkins YouTube channel, who are also joining us as players. So if you want to meet up in person, say hi, watch us play some D&D, come do that. It'll be a really good time. So 7th till 9th, I'm going to trust Dael that she knows the dates because...
I looked it up. I was right.
Okay, good. I'm glad. 7th till 9th. So Sunday night, we will be in the Kookaburra Theatre at 12:30.
Now, question, will those events, will any of them be streamed on the PAX Twitch streams?
I'm glad you've asked, because if you are like Shawn, but not like James, will not be in Australia during PAX Australia, yes, I don't believe Authoring Adventures will be streamed. We might try record it. But the Sailing the Stars, the Ethereal Sea Adventure will be streamed. It will be streamed. It won't be on the Ghostfire Gaming channel, though. I think it'll be on the PAX Australia channel, but I will get back. Keep an eye on Ghostfire Gaming and or my Twitter, and I will let people know. I should be more prepared for this stuff. I was like, I'll write the times down. I'll guess at the dates. And we'll be good to go. Clearly not.
That question sounded very prepared. It was not planned. I just tried to keep Ben on his toes there.
I want to point out that you said PAX Australia, like you did every syllable, which I don't think I've ever heard.
Yeah, I suppose because the majority of our audience is in the US, I suppose I feel the need to spell that out a little bit more.
Paxstraya.
Paxstraya. Australia, mate. We're going to old PAX, just dropping by down by the creek. We're just going to go into the convention center and check it out. All right. Anyway, enough of that. Let us crack on.
It's
a bit
very
of
silly.
More general news this week is that the playtest survey for One D&D. I feel like One D&D has really dominated the conversation around tabletop RPGs for the last couple of weeks, and why wouldn't it? It's kind of like spell jam what. One D&D is the way is the focus right now of the fan base. Playtest survey is open until September 15th. So if you have been playtesting the new rules for One D&D, you have until September 15th to let Wizards of the Coast know what you feel about it. I think maybe James and Shawn or possibly Dael can correct me on this. Is it just characters that they're taking feedback for now, like the character creation and backgrounds, not so much the more general rules around like crits? Am I correct in that, or
That's
am
a good
I
question? I haven't looked at that survey yet.
The survey does include things like critical hits and some of the other rules. Not every single rule is mentioned, but it's not just the character creation and backgrounds. It's a little bit of everything.
I'm so incredibly grateful, Shawn, that you're here to keep us semi-professional as we sort of guess through.
There is no one more semi-professional than me.
An interesting statistic I saw, Wizards are saying that more players have taken part in the One D&D playtest than in the D&D Next playtest, which was at the start of 5th edition.
Wow.
The numbers that I could find was 175,000 people took part in the D&D Next playtest. So I'm not that impressed, honestly, considering that 175 is like... There are D&D focused YouTube channels these days that crush 175 views like within a week. So there must be, I've got to assume, over 1 million people at least giving feedback on this playtest by this point.
175 was landmark back in 2014, though. It was unbelievable how many people weighed in on that playtest when it was happening. But now, yeah, you're totally right. Critical Role logs more than that on their live streams alone every week.
Yes.
I think we just all agree. It's like if we look at the percentage change, I would be interested just to compare the percentage change of people who participated in the thing before the D&D Next playtest versus the percentage change in like regular consumers of D&D content, right? Like the game is bigger now, so I'm not surprised that the playtest participants are bigger now. There weren't nearly as many D&D channels crushing 175k views in a week back when it was 4th edition content. They were out there, but there weren't nearly as many.
No, for sure. My question is, was D&D Next as open as the One D&D playtest is? Was it as just like everybody crack on with it?
Yeah, if I remember right, that was basically how it was.
Yeah, sure.
A big playtest packet came out and people went through it, and then there was a survey.
What's also interesting is that it obviously means that heaps of people, more than 175,000, are using D&D Beyond, right? Because the survey is through D&D Beyond. Do you need to have a D&D Beyond account to be able to fill out the survey?
I don't think so. You can hear that certainty in my voice.
Yeah, I'm not sure because I have a D&D Beyond account and I took the survey, but that doesn't mean everyone can. But I assume that they would want you to have an account in order to give feedback because then they have your email address. So it would make sense.
Here's the thing, though. If I'm remembering back to before I had a D&D Beyond account, because I was a holdout, but before I used it, I could still download things like the Unearthed Arcana if someone asked me to look at it and have an opinion.
But that wasn't through the D&D Beyond website. Like that would have just been through Wizards of the Coast website, the Unearthed Arcana.
Maybe. I thought I was getting it through D&D Beyond, but you're probably right. But I don't know. It seems counterintuitive to me if you genuinely want feedback from the whole community to be like, okay, but you could only access this if you are someone who also wants to use our digital tool set. You know what I mean? Like that seems to me like it would cause just inordinate amounts of bias.
It might be a way of them preventing false survey reports, weighting the surveys by people sort of anonymously inputting survey results.
I think they'll do that anyway.
Yeah.
If you need an account, then they know that your feedback came from someone. Now, could you go out and create 27,000 accounts? True. You sure could. If you are that enthusiastic about D&D coming up that you go out and create extra accounts to give extra feedback, I want to harness your energy. That's all I can say.
Well, what's interesting to me is I don't know how long I expected this survey to last for. Or I don't know how long I thought they would wait before releasing the survey. But my just first gut instinct was like, this doesn't feel like a particularly long period, especially because not everybody plays D&D. Like we're living in the era of the influencer now, right? And the D&D influencer specifically. And there's a lot of influencer hot takes coming in on Twitter at the moment around One D&D, including the hot take, which is like, don't listen to influencers or D&D channels. Make your own assessments about these new rules. But do you think there is going to be a level of people who are filling out the survey based on their favorite YouTuber's opinion rather than critically thinking themselves?
If I may speak as a D&D YouTuber for a moment,
I I like that you didn't use the term influencer. I felt wanky using it myself.
Well, I mean, I don't think that anyone can get away with calling themselves an influencer. I think that if you use that term, you've lost your influence. But no, I have been starkly aware of a growing opinion, particularly on Reddit, but it is, it's out there, it's everywhere. People are really fed up with the existence of D&D YouTubers at the moment. Not everyone, by any means. You can see that still successful channels, still popular, but I don't know whether influencer is the right term. I think that this community, and maybe I'm just biased because I have a great community, but I think that the people who engage with D&D content on YouTube are not super likely to just agree with that person. I think that the fun of being a part of that community for a lot of people is engaging with it critically. You listen to what your favorite D&D YouTuber says and you go, this part's cool, this part I don't like as much, I would change this to do that. What if you ran it this way instead? It's, if you look at the comments on the game that you and I, Ben, played with the Dungeon Dudes recently, those comments are full of valuable insights and interesting input from people who are talking about game design. How would they change the design of this playtest material for the Dungeon Dudes? My favorite D&D YouTuber is Matt Colville, and he's my favorite partly because I feel like I'm allowed to disagree with him. It's that kind of community where we are also within the mindset, particularly for DMs, we're so within the mindset of wanting to create stuff that I don't think there's as much of that that supposed thing of just doing what your favorite creator says.
Sure. Yeah, that's fair. I think that's very astute.
Maybe I'm just a romantic. Maybe I'm just a hopeful.
No, I mean,
idealistic and foolish and naive.
From the comments that you see in most D&D YouTube videos, I heartily agree with you that, and there was, on that playtest with the Dungeon Dudes for their Apothecary class in particular, there was some really good feedback in there that even made me think, yeah, this could work like that, and maybe this is how it should be. And I was going to write Monty an email, but anyway, now I'm just digressing, or I will digress to asking, have any of us, not that One D&D, like I said, has really dominated the headlines, if you will, for the last few weeks. So I hope I'm not exhausting any of our listeners on it specifically, but I'm just curious now that it has been a few weeks, have any of us been able to play D&D using those rules to form an opinion from actual playtest, especially if that opinion may have changed? So, speaking of no opinions,
I got nothing, Ben. I don't even know how to start a campaign anymore.
I've played since they came out. I've played a couple of times since they've come out, but we're in the middle of a campaign and we didn't want to switch everything up. And we could go and do some different rules, but my takeaway from this is when before the first packet came out, I was wondering how far are they going to deviate from 5e. And so I think a big takeaway, whether it could be a big sigh of relief for some, it could be a sort of, oh, that's too bad from others, is that they aren't going to deviate far from 5e. The base of it. There's still going to be races, even though races have been problematic, to say the least, over the years and even very, very recently. But they're still looks like they're going to stick with those, right? They're still going to have the stat bonuses tied to something other than just choose some stat bonuses. So that was my big, do I really need to play test all of this, or is it going to be these little tiny changes that are just enough of a change that you have to buy some new books, but you really don't need to play test the core of the game all that much?
I'm also, I think part of me is waiting to see non-character creation rules before I'll really get into the meat of how does this work in play, right? Because I feel like you see it most starkly in a lot of indie games probably, but I think that it will be true of D&D playtest material as it is of anything is that you end up with really strong, well thought out, pretty substantial rules when it comes to character creation, and then things start to get a little wibbly and shaky from there. So I'm more interested in that stuff, I think.
Dael, I'm totally with you, because the thing that would really get me excited to playtest One D&D, and like you lot, I have not yet, not really, largely because I've been on an airplane, but but for other reasons also, is that the thing that would draw me to the One D&D playtest is exploration rules. The thing that has long been the sort of missing third pillar of D&D, and something that we at Ghostfire have done in our Aurora campaign setting, which Shawn was the mastermind behind, that really attempt to dive into making the act of exploring the world a very sort of effortful and agency-filled and fun part of gameplay, which in core 5e, it doesn't really exist. There's no mechanical backing other than some oft-maligned ranger features for finding your way around a world, which I think is generally fine. I've written articles for D&D Beyond in the years past where I talk about different ways of doing exploration, and I think that often the DM saying, "and you make it there," is a perfectly good way of doing exploration, but that's not a pillar of gameplay. And as it stands, 5e kind of pretends that it is. So having some actual meat to that pillar would be very fun, and I'd be excited, really excited, to dive into it.
We got a question on episode, I want to say 47, which was a YouTube comment. So if you're watching this on YouTube, feel free to comment. I apologize as well. Maybe Dael, if you're watching the Twitch chat, if there's a question there to pull in, I'm not watching it anymore to hope that my internet's more stable.
You're alone in here with me, chat.
But Neto or NATO, I hope I'm saying Neto, N-E-T-O's question was about bringing in pillar support through feats. I think it was something that you were talking about in that episode, Dael, and feats that encourage and enhance exploration and social encounters, but don't negate the challenge, much like the ranger tends to do, or a lot of spells like Goodberry, or even like, what's it called? Pass Without Trace. Trying to sneak around, I feel like feels like part of the exploration mechanic, and just casting Pass Without Trace is like, you sneak. Like, you're fine. You don't need to worry. So what are some feat ideas that could be introduced that you may have that kind of encourage those pillars without just negating those pillars?
Right. So when I was talking about that in that episode of the podcast, whichever it was, one of them, what I was alluding to was less about feats and was more about background features in a different world to the world we're heading into, right? 5.5, I'm just going to stop calling it One D&D. I know that we should be professionals and call it by the name it's been given on this, our professional podcast, but I hate it. So anyway, 5.5 is heading in this feats direction. But what I was kind of alluding to, just to get into it very briefly, is a different thing that I've been sort of tinkering with on the side that is not exactly, I don't expect it to be a part of D&D, you know what I mean? But the kind of ideas that I was talking about were things like, I would love to see a version of backgrounds for homebrew purposes only, where you get to pick multiple. I'm always fascinated by games where you get to pick multiple things and shove them together in whatever combination you like, right? So in my imagining of this universe, you have, all these different backgrounds, and each one has a minor feature, one that is combat-based, one that is social-based, and one that is exploration-based. And you get to choose 3 backgrounds, and you pick one that you take the social feature for, one that you take the combat feature for, and one that you take the exploration feature for. So as an example of that, Han Solo as a character is like, he's a space smuggler, right? But you might take as his backgrounds, criminal, gambler, fugitive, right? And he might take the fugitive combat feature, which lets him shoot first, right? And he might take the criminal exploration feature, which gives him, secret paths that he knows about, that he can take shortcuts, right? That sort of a thing is kind of what I was briefly touching on when we talked about it last time. In this world of feats, we do get little glimpses of that. I think the key difference is I like it when these feats open up opportunities. And you can see that from time to time in combat feats already. Like one of the new ones that I think is really cool, the new version of Alert, you get some combat mechanical boosts, like, you add your proficiency bonus to your initiative roll. That's cool. But what's super cool about the new Alert feat is that it lets you immediately after rolling initiative swap your place in the initiative order with someone else. And that's an opportunity. It isn't just a flat, you are good at this now. It is an opportunity, and it gives you agency and choice in how you use it. And I think that's where the goal for me lies in terms of incorporating the other pillars into it. You have to open up opportunities. Like Dungeon Delver lets you look for secret doors. And that's cool because it opens up an opportunity to explore another part of the dungeon that you maybe wouldn't have seen before. The whatever feature it is that lets you read lips, right? That opens up opportunities for play because you can tell what someone is saying without being able to hear them, or things like that. I think those are the cool stuff. Sorry, Shawn, go ahead.
No, I mean, all of what you're saying is totally on point. Unless we have some clear and utile rules around exploration and even role-playing, even social, there's only so much you can do with those feats. Those feats need to interact with some piece of the puzzle. And if you don't make the rest of the puzzle for it to interact with, you're just throwing out these feats that don't do anything. They can do things if the dungeon master is adept enough at making them work within the campaign or within the adventure. But that takes work on behalf of the dungeon master, that the game should be taking on that role instead of forcing DMs to take on that role. So, we can dream about these things, and it's great to dream about, but until the game itself fixes this issue, and we don't have any promise yet that it will, then thinking about how to fix this small portion of it doesn't help.
Oh, this is just a small point about the intersection of game design from a raw mechanical level and scenario design or adventure design. I think in the D&D world, a lot of people think of them as being fairly separate items. Mechanics are one thing, adventures are something completely different. But when you talk about something like the Dungeon Delver feat, secret doors are vital to certain types of campaigns, to certain kinds of scenarios. But if Wizards never publishes an adventure with a secret door in it ever again, which they won't, but they may not have very many in highly socially based adventures like Wild Beyond the Witchlight, for example, then that Dungeon Delver feat is, you'll go on Giant in the Playground or some forums, and you'll see it as a red feat in every single optimization guide or something like that, which will give people a certain impression about how useful that feat is. Even if it is very, very good within its niche, the fact that it is niche and that niche isn't supported broadly by the game means that, unless you've had a really strong session zero with your GM where they tell you, yes, this is going to be a heavily dungeon focused campaign and there will be secret doors all over the place, then you probably will not want to pick one of those extremely cool but extremely niche feats like that.
Yeah, which gets back to the heart of the problem, which is that you want to take a feat that will come up. And so, of course, that combat is going to come up at some point.
Yeah.
And so you're going to take the feat that gives you the flat boost to your, ranged attack rolls or whatever, rather than taking a feat that does stuff like this. But I think you could restructure it to, like even looking at this new Alert feat and seeing how it flips that on its head. It may not always be helpful to swap your place in initiative, but having the opportunity to do it is a big deal. And I also think that something that we've touched on already in this conversation is that there is, it's a shadow of a ghost, but there is slightly more support and structure behind social pillar of the game than there is the exploration. So I think an example of that is that we have, personality traits, ideals, bonds, and flaws on the character sheet. And even though those are aspects of it that are frequently glossed over and that you can easily forget, they are a thing that you can take advantage of. I mean, this is just a little design thing I did. I designed a Greek tragic bard, basically, and it had a feature that was based on the tragic flaw, right? And so the idea was that you could spend time observing a person or talking to a person and figure out what is their flaw, what is their bond, and use that then to gain a mechanical boost in social interaction. But you have to do that social legwork and engage with that part of the game that you usually gloss over, which is something that we don't really have the opportunity to do when it comes to exploration, because exploration largely mechanically comes down to how far can you walk in a day, how often do you need to sleep, and how much can you carry? What's your encumbrance and rations and stuff like that? And those are, none of them have very much depth. And so when you try to engage with them mechanically elsewhere, you end up with features like the ranger features that say, oh yeah, well, you don't need to worry about rations anymore. And that just, it knocks away a bit of there's not much pillar there, and you're knocking bits away. You're just chipping away at it.
Well, I do need to say that the game needs to decide what it is in all of this, because if the game, we can all play the game a different way, but at some point the game needs to tell us what it wants to be. And if it is a game where at its core it's you need to get your enemies to 0 hit points before they get you to 0 hit points, if that's where the brunt of the game is going to be, then all those other pillars need to somehow work into that. And it could be by draining resources. It could be by making life harder when you are socially inept somewhere, or when you're unable to gather the right type of information or something. But if the game doesn't move away from that 0 hit points, you or them aspect of how most people, I would say, play the game, not saying you can't play it another way, but that's what the game wants you to play, then all of this goes for naught. You can explore and succeed. You can explore and fail. You can socialize and succeed. You can socialize and fail. If there's no consequences to that point of do you survive or not, then it's adding a lot of makeup to something that at its base you can't make look better than it is.
Rampant Wombat asked in the Discord chat a little while ago, you might meet a Rampant Wombat while you're here.
I hope I don't.
Me too. You might meet a Rampant Magpie, actually. They asked a question about like what we mean by the exploration pillar, and just kind of bouncing off what Dael was saying a moment ago and what Shawn was saying actually about, what is the goal of the game. I think for me, defining the exploration pillar is it's not so much about how to get from A to B, even through the dungeon. I think a really good example, and I'm going to breaking Witcher Watch for this week is Monster Hunts. Cool. Really fantastic for bringing out the exploration pillar, because you can leave clues as to what the monster is that you're going to be fighting, that the party are hunting after. And if the party actively seek those clues and engage in that exploration, fighting the monster becomes a lot easier. And if they don't, then fighting the monster might be a lot harder. And one example from an adventure I wrote, I think 2 years ago now, was this monster called a swamp basilisk, which was like this giant snake that could... wasn't so much I think it was like paralysis, but it was only for a turn. It was meant to be a lowish CR creature. It also had a really venomous, like wyvern-like tail attack, and would grab onto things and swim away with them. And it was quite large as well. So it's like, all right, here's this farmer. All his goats have been killed. There's no remains left of the goats. They've just been picked up and run away with. So obviously this thing is large. which is something that I don't just tell the players. It's like, oh, you can see this pen has been broken open. I investigate where the break is. All right, you can see that obviously something very large had to shatter through here. So you're dealing with a big monster. Where do the tracks lead? Into the water. Okay, obviously this thing can swim and dive underwater. And then eventually through, and this was included a bit in the Grim Hollow Monster Grimoire as well, making ability checks to be able to learn information about monsters, that if you know that the swamp basilisk is an ambush predator that paralyzes you if you look at it, and has a poison sting on the end of its tail, you put your dwarves out front, you stand away from the water, and you don't look at it as you cast your spells or whatever. And so the fight becomes very easy. If they don't engage with that pillar, the design of the adventure was this thing leaps out of the water, grabs one of you, and swims away. And God's help that person, because you didn't engage with the exploration pillar to be able to learn how to best combat this creature.
Yeah, and that's exactly tying into the sort of thing that Shawn's talking about, where it's like, yeah, that is an offshoot now of the core pillar of the game, which is combat, which is don't get to 0 hit points before the other guy does. Which, if that's the way the D&D wants to play it, I think that would be a very D&D way of doing it. I think one of the things that the folks designing D&D are very cognizant of is, let's create the best D&D that we can. I was talking about this the other week, but often criticisms of D&D boil down to, it does a thing that D&D does, and I don't like that. If you want a game that has a flatter dice curve and uses 3d6 instead of 1d20, you've very quickly gone away from one of the things that is really core to the almost mythological play experience of Dungeons and Dragons. And combat being a hit point based, attack and spell based system is also very core to what D&D does. And that being very central to the main point of the game is something that I don't think the Wizards would be very interested in moving away from, just because that's such a D&D TM thing to do. And because D&D is so important, a lot of other fantasy games have done it too. A lot of people, video games, Skyrim, even The Witcher, things like that, have taken those cues and made their own games based on it with their own changes. But because those are a completely different property, they have the freedom to make those changes, whereas D&D has its role, and it must play the role of D&D.
One of the ways that I like to think of exploration is, rather than moving from one place to another, it's moving from the known to the unknown. And so in that case, role-playing encounters are exploration. If you are trying to pry a secret out of someone, if you need to know the name of the assassin who is out there and you're at a party, you're not role-playing, you're exploring. And you could make a diagram of it, just like you make a diagram of a dungeon. Okay, who do we have to talk to first? How do we get through this encounter to get to the next encounter, even though we're not fighting? So if you think of exploration as that, it also fits in with the Monster Grimoire book of learning these secrets to save your skin at a later time, even though you're making intelligence checks to learn information or questioning someone, you are still going from the known to the unknown, which will then feed into that combat pillar when you have the advantage facing a creature.
Right. So this all plays into, I think, the key issue for me. I've made a video about this, is that D&D rules as written tends to think of exploration as being the same as travel. And I think it's really easy to think of it that way because we've all watched Lord of the Rings and we've seen them, climbing over mountains, and we've gone, that's it. That's the part that we want, right? But what we're actually talking about is discovery. And that's, you have this really interesting way that both Shawn and Ben have just laid out that makes exploration sort of fit in. It locks in with the other pillars, both combat and social, through that avenue of discovery. Because if you're just doing travel, just plot it like any dungeon, right? Like they'll run into bandits at this point and then they'll do this and then they'll have a rest and blah, blah, blah. But if you're dealing with exploration, you're dealing with what's around the next bend. It is the known to the unknown, as Shawn said. And you get really interesting stuff there. But I also think that it's fascinating. This is what I love about these games, right? When Ben is talking about this, go around, discover things about the monster, and it'll help you in combat later. That creates a super interesting, and I think in many ways superior way of using knowledge stuff, right? Like it's not just one roll, this stuff about dragons. It is you are learning things, you are discovering things as you go, and that is more interesting. You are uncovering more stuff. But the more and more you do that, the more you pull on that thread, the more things start to unravel with, for example, just the intelligence ability score existing. And you start to find these weird little chinks in the system the more that you pull on them. And then you find more that you have to patch and more that you have to patch. And that's just kind of how it goes, because this is all one big arc that we're just trying to keep afloat. We're just fixing it as we go.
When I play video games like Skyrim, fantasy games who have their roots in the D&D tradition, they have one huge advantage over D&D when it comes to exploration, and it's the fact that you can actively in real time see and control your character moving in an environment. D&D has, it has an unlimited budget, right? It has the budget of the imagination, but there's something that becomes immediately less visceral, less realistic about saying, I'm here, and now I move here.
Yeah.
Whereas when you're playing a video game, you have to do something, even if it's just, tapping on a control stick to move from that place to another place.
Yeah.
And the thing that's different about it is that move is a verb. It's a thing you're actively doing for a consistent and ongoing period of time in a video game. And the sheer act of doing that verb is fun. Even if it's, even if it's not high action, if it's not intense, it is fun to just move a guy in a cool space. And in D&D, you don't really have a lot of agency in the act of moving. There's agency in the act of deciding where to move, but the act of moving is a non-event in D&D. And I think everything we're talking about exploration, and this moving can be moving through a physical space, or it can be moving through a social space, or anything like that. Only in combat does the act of moving become a verb, a thing you can do, because there is reactivity to it. There's the potential for opportunity attacks. There's the potential to avoid hazards. There's actual things that can be done in the space, as opposed to when you're out of that sort of highly detailed, tactical, grid-based movement. It's like, okay, and I go here now. Things to do in the act of moving is something that I think we all want out of a robust D&D exploration pillar. And in a dungeon, you can do things like traps. That will work fine. In a social encounter, I can see social traps, faux pas, becoming something like that. The classic ballroom courtier-laden setting of acting the right way and doing things the right way can be a very potent sort of movement option, so to speak, if the DM does a good job of communicating that to the players.
Yeah.
That it's a more high concept way of moving than I walk down a hallway, so people won't maybe inherently get it unless they themselves in real life are used to navigating high society events, which I doubt 95% of the D&D player base have every day experience in doing.
Just, I'm sure we've got some very affluent D&D players out there, but not everybody. But
not everyone is going to the White House to attend a presidential gala daily, and if they do, they aren't playing D&D most likely.
That feeling of motion, of movement, of travel, and I don't want to talk about travel too much because I don't want to pin down exploration as being travel, right? Mm-hmm. Because exploration, I think, is all the things that we're talking about, but it reminds me of different ways that I've tried to capture that sense of movement. I remember I ran one campaign from the very start, and I was like, I want this to feel like Skyrim or Breath of the Wild or The Witcher, dare I say, where it feels like you can see the mountains in the distance and you can see this castle here and you can see that over there, whatever it is, maybe a cave opening or something. How do you, and then you can go there, you can travel there. And how do you make that happen in D&D? Largely because when you're playing Breath of the Wild, you climb up the top of a hill, you survey the horizon, and you notice things that are not brought to your like immediate attention. They're not signposted. They're not like, hey, here's this thing, you should go check it out. It might be is that a shape of something I can kind of see over there? I'm going to go over there and check it out. And it feels like you discovered it. And the problem for the game master is the players don't know what you don't describe. They don't know anything exists if you don't say it's there.
Right.
And if you say it's there, that can often feel like a flag post of like, you're being told this is here. The way that I solved this very quickly for that campaign, or tried to at least, was to create a physical map and be like, all right, here's the physical map. You are here currently. Where do you want to go, without pointing out everything, just sort of having obvious landmarks that the players could choose to go to. And it's sort of being, and we've talked about this on the podcast before, flow charts and almost like a mesh pattern where they can't just go from here over to here. They have to go to one of the two spots in between and try and use that to create a sense of progression. But sorry, Dael, go ahead. You look like you want to.
Oh, no, I was just going to say it's what you're talking about is that information deficit that I've mentioned before, right? It's that thing of you have to know that you don't know something in order to want to find out what you don't know. And that is so much easier to create in a video game than it is in a tabletop RPG. But like you're saying, maps are a really good way to do it. And I think it's interesting as you're bringing it up that it's occurring to me that games like in the West Marches style tend to be much more successful as exploration games. They are games about exploration because, and I mean, I'm about to get on a mythology soapbox for a minute. When we go back to Greek mythology, we're looking at stories that are ultimately stories about civilization and the wilds, right? And the tension between those things, the spaces between that are contentious, right? So Oedipus is safe in Corinth. He will be safe in Thebes, but before he can get to Thebes, he has to go through what is the no man's land between the wilds and civilization, and that is where it is not safe. And you look at West Marches games, and I'm sure that other styles of games do it, but it's just so easy in West Marches, where you are in a safe place in civilization, but you have to go out to where it is not safe anymore. And that does that thing that Shawn is talking about, right? Where it has to interact with that core element of the game, which is you're not safe anymore and you could hit 0 hit points. But that idea of the map, creating kind of a fog of war, I have toyed with the idea before of just using sort of flipped over tiles. So they're blank on one side and you have to go there for them to flip over and maybe you can see the tiles around you. You go to this tile, flip over the ones near it, and suddenly you go, ooh, but what's that? What's that little thing that's marked over there? I want to see what that is, even though I'm on the way to this other thing. It's creating that sort of temptation.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I agree. This is going to be a little bit random.
I just did a little 2-minute bit about Greek mythology. I think you're fine.
Yeah, we've all got our. I was going to be like beep, mythology watch coming in. Shawn, is that Dragons of Stormwreck Isle on the shelf behind you?
Yes, it is.
Shawn's in real time. Shawn's not delayed.
It's a miracle. I can talk again. I won't feel like I'm interrupting everyone.
To be fair, that was Cosmic Postman pointed that out in the chat, and then I was like, I got to test this.
Wait a minute. Now you just have to interrupt people for fun.
Now, or profit.
Yeah.
One more thing about exploration, right? That's what we're trying to do with the Aurora rules, bringing them back around to that. It's
Aurora rules.
Aurora rules, yes. It's you have this place you need to go to. Do you go directly there? Or do you go partway there and set up a village? Take the time to do that. Use your skills, use your role play, use maybe even some feats. to do that more effectively, which then will make it easier to go to the new place. But you're spending valuable time when you do that. And that time you spend may or may not be worth it, depending on the actual rolls that the dice make to tell you how well you succeed, which is what this game is all about in the first place. So, right, that's how you use rules to make exploration a big part of the actual surviving the game that it is.
Yeah, I really enjoy just the playtest that we did for Aurora in terms of making exploration relevant, but also allowing the GM to create like regions with mystery to them that the players can uncover through exploring those regions. It did a good job, I think, of what I was trying to do in terms of that Breath of the Wild experience of like, there's an information deficit here. There are things that you don't know about the world that you need to go and explore, and you can't just go straight to the thing that you don't know about. You might need to travel somewhere else first and use some of the racial abilities as well, the racial traits that you have constructed your character out of to be able to explore these areas as well.
And that brings us right back to the topic that we had at the beginning of this episode, which was starting the sandbox campaign with players who have no idea where to go, because there's an immense information deficit right there.
Yes.
And unless you can provide that, then the actual sort of exploration-based campaign is never going to get the spark it needs to start going.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope that we have answered, as well as Nito's question on the YouTube channel, the email question that came in from Leon, which was basically asking about the forgotten pillars of play and supporting and handling social encounters as well as exploration encounters. The one thing, just very quickly, James, from what you were saying earlier, reminded me when you were talking about movement as well in social contexts. One of the ways that I've tried to handle social exploration off of what Shawn was saying before was creating like a masquerade ball and being like, all right, it's a masquerade ball. Here's all the important NPCs are attending. You have the ability to talk to them, but there's like tiers of VIP-ness, right? There's like the plebs that were invited. There's like Bruce Wayne's private like VIP section where all like the generals and the captains and the military and political leaders are kind of attending. And then there's Bruce Wayne's pool room where like you might play billiards with Bruce Wayne personally if you can get high enough. So that was that attempt to create like, you have to socialize on the bottom tier to schmooze your way into the mid tier to eventually schmooze your way to the top tier. But what you made me want to do is lay out a masquerade ball like a combat on a grid, and you literally have to move around, like use your movement speed. Maybe it's half speed because you're squeezing through the crowd to get to the NPCs that are scattered throughout the crowd. And then you need to like, if you can get an ally to be next to you, you get advantage on social checks to try to schmooze this specific person. Just was like, let's run social encounters like combat. I feel like we almost need a new rule system there for it, but it got me excited. Are there RPGs out there that use social hit points? Because I see this idea.
I think there are. They're very cool.
Fate does that. You can have sort of psychic or social. With Fate, you can make any sort of game or Witcher.
I would just like to point out that Ben said VIP-ness.
Is that not a word?
I heard it, Dael.
You'll pick up on it.
Shawn, we've got to play more Fate together. We did that last year around Christmas time, and it was so much fun. We got to play more Fate.
I agree.
Well, speaking of fate, it is the fate of this podcast to end for the time being, because we have just about reached time. If you have an email question, to email through to us, or you can comment on this YouTube video if that's where you're watching it. Thank you to the Twitch chat for not only helping us solve our tech issues at the start of the episode, but also asking questions. coming back to what I was originally saying, you can email podcast@ghostfiregaming.com with a question. We try to get through as many as we can each week. So email them through. I bank them up. Hopefully none of them are too time sensitive. Sometimes people are asking for advice on their campaigns and I'm like, I hope we get to this in time. But definitely shoot it through. And I flag all of them and keep them banked there as we go through each episode. Otherwise, you can subscribe to the YouTube channel or leave us a star rating on Spotify or wherever you're listening to us. It helps the channel grow. I don't think we otherwise do any other sort of like promo for this channel. It's all word of mouth for the Eldritch Lorecast at the moment.
And that's how we like it.
And that's how we like it. Isn't it how we like it? Oh, that's how we like it. All right, cool. I've been Ben Byrne, as always, here with Shawn Merwin, Dael Kingsmill, and James Haig. I will catch you next week. Goodbye. That was an episode.